Yes, first of all, thank you for this kind introduction and then also for the possibility to speak here in this like really amazing and impressive venue. And it's actually now I get to enjoy like a little bit at least the view. I'm actually really humbled, as you also said, Jean-Jan, by all the research that you've conducted and also a bit, I'm coming from a very different perspective. And this is because as like somebody from the humanities, I have more a perspective that is a meta perspective or maybe a macro perspective and not so much like going into the fields of research for single examples, but really trying to get an idea of a bigger picture. And I think I will also tell on one hand something that is a bit different, but then in the end I will also get back to that. But it means that this is because I'm coming really from a Western perspective and I am actually interested in what kind of conceptualizations do we have as Western cultures, but also how maybe does it influence other cultures on the interaction and relationships of humans, machines, and AI. So the exploration and negotiation of the relationship between humans, machines, and AI in fictional narratives, including film, artistic expression and literature are important elements of societal, socio-technical imaginaries. This was a term that was coined by Shaila Yasanov and I forgot the second name, but I think you will see it here. Shaila Yasanov and Sang-Yoon Kim, exactly. And it is described as actually collectively held, institutionally stabilized, and publicly performed visions of desirable futures, animated by shared understandings of forms of social life and social order attainable through and supportive of advances in science and technology. And this is actually also something that informs research programs and governments as well. So these imaginaries shape the conceptual framework within which we discuss and think about human-machine relations. So this presentation here has two interconnected goals. Firstly, I'd like to argue that the works of art and literature and popular culture such as film, and I think I will mostly, well, partly at least mostly refer to film, tell us a lot not only about our ideas and concepts of human-machine relationships and their historical entanglements, but also shape our understandings and visions for future technological endeavors. Thus, I think it is essential to acknowledge these works as a form of knowledge production of their own, and also significant contributors to societal and academic discourse. On building on this foundation, I want to go to my second point of this presentation, which delves into ways in which our collective visions of human-machine relationships are actually intervened with concepts like white supremacy, patriarchy, and colonialism. And I would like to demonstrate how these entanglements implicitly sustain narratives rooted in Western epistemologies that were actually shaped by these ideologies, which are, of course, quite problematic. But let's start a little bit more light. So when it comes to the relationship between humans and machines, much of what concerns intelligent machines has been addressed through the 3 laws of robotics formulated by Isaac Asimov in 1942 in his science fiction short story Runaround. And these 3 laws of robotics were intended actually to act as a form as ethical guidance for researchers and scientists in the development and programming of future robots and artificial intelligence. But it's not only experts who are familiar with Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. The set of laws formulated by the scientist and professor for biochemistry is actually rooted in science fiction, which, as we all know, has quite some popularity and especially his stories reached quite a broad audience. Asimov's stories, which won many awards, have thus been widely received outside of academia as well. To this day, Asimov's 3 laws of robotics continue to be the foundation of numerous discussions in popular culture and high culture as well, concerning the conceptualization of the relationship between humans and machines. But Asimov's ideas are not only influential in art, in literature and film, they also serve as a crucial point of reference for debates on ethics and philosophy related to man and machine and their interaction and their relationships. So in essence, the relationships that Asimov describes are characterized by clear hierarchies. And I think these hierarchies you can see here, where there's also the set of the 3 laws, which actually starts with that the robot is inferior to the human being, so it may not harm it, right? And then it continues like that. So Asimov's example illustrates that the discussion about the relationship between man and machine is based on the long-term standing tradition of separating subject and object, nature and culture, and consequently also humans and machines. And this tradition is quite strongly rooted in humanist thinking that was established in the Western world. And I will get back to the problematic points of these epistemologies later. But however, Asimov's work was also well received in Japan, indicating that the discourse surrounding robots and artificial intelligence is not simply a dichotomy between East and West or between Shintoist, animist, and Western thought. It is rather a complex interdependent relationship that involves interactions between, again, literature, art, and science. And I think a quite famous and well-known example for this is Masahiro Mori's Uncanny Valley. In this work, Mori explores the possibility of eliminating the perceived differences between humans, artificial body parts, and robots through the lenses of cybernetics, design, and art to overcome what he calls the uncanny valley. And this term describes actually a situation in which a robot is almost perceived as human, but not quite, resulting in a highly unsettling feeling. This text that was published in 1970 arose from his collaboration with a Viennese research group, and the entanglements between art and design and research, and also between East and West, are becoming evident here as well. But although Mori was received early on in the Western world, the idea of overcoming the uncanny valley initially remained quite unsettling there, and therefore really uncanny. And this underlying sense of unease in the relationship between humans and intelligent machines in the Western world can be traced back to hierarchical thinking, which is also embedded into the laws of robotics that were described by Asimov. Man and machine are not considered to be equal, a framework that Mori implicitly suggests we move beyond. And what I want to point out here, because I think it was quite important what you said before, Gentian, when I'm talking about here, it's not that I'm talking about robots as being conscious. I'm talking about the discussion about them and what it would mean if they would be conscious and how we treat them in this discussion. I think I want to give this as like a preset. So in general, this leads to the question, did this thinking of this clear distinction between man and machine emerge solely from the robotic laws of Asimov? And the answer is, of course, no. I would argue that the development of these laws, which still significantly influence contemporary Western views on the relationship of man and machine, is linked to the intervenement of Western epistemologies, which do not only formulate a clear distinction between nature and technology, man and machine, but is also rooted in ongoing patterns of thought that are rooted in colonialism and white supremacy. These complex connections have been brought to light in recent years, I would say, by feminist and post-colonial studies. And before I move on, I just want to say 2 words about the images that you see here. I had yesterday long discussions with Dali because I was I was asking, I call her, I was asking her to create me an image where I first described like really critical terms. I said like Western epistemology, colonialism, slavery, racism. And Dolly said, I cannot do this. We had really long discussions about this. It's like against my rules, I cannot do this. And I was like, yeah, okay, then describe me universal man against like race and whiteness, and still not possible. So at some point I just gave up and I reloaded. And then I said like, please show me the universal man in Western societies and knowledge systems. And this is what came up there without any question. So actually, I didn't even have to raise so much the race or the colonialism or the critical questions, because I could just raise the question that you would naturally raise, and you can pretty much see what is absent and how universal man or the idea of universal man is described here. So it's basically like quite obvious that it's white men in the middle of the universe that are described there. Yeah, exactly. So I think that was quite interesting. I had a good moment there yesterday. So where I felt like, so a critical reevaluation of knowledge system acknowledging their Eurocentric biases has gained momentum in recent years, and I think this is also why we ask these critical questions. And the reevaluation challenges the traditional humanistic disciplines that have been struggled to address actually modern societal issues due to their focus on so-called universal men, neglecting the diversity actually of the human experience. But actually in the last years, authors like Fatima El-Tayyib point out that our modern thought is shaped by theories operating in Europe, which were established at the expense of other cultures, knowledges, and practices. This historical context has been perpetuated a state of coloniality, fostering ongoing exclusion and vulnerability. Donna Haraway illuminates this issue as she identifies persistent dualisms in Western traditions that underpin systems of domination. In her Cyborg Manifesto, she writes, I quote her here, "To recapitulate, certain dualisms have been persistent in Western traditions. They have been systemic to the logics and practices of domination of women, people of color, nature, worker, animals. In short, domination of all constituted as others, whose task is to mirror the self. Chief among these troubling dualisms are self-other, mind-body, culture-nature, male-female, civilized primitive, God-man. The logic of white supremacy, which posits the superiority of one race over the others, has its root in such dualistic and binary thinking. In this context, I think it's crucial to remember that the philosophical underpinnings of humanism and enlightenment emerged alongside and justified, actually, colonial conquests and slavery. Enlightenment philosophers like Immanuel Kant, who categorized humans into races and attributed the pinnacle of humanity to the white race, while demeaning other races as lacking in talent and intellect and civilization, exemplify this. The ideology of white supremacy provided a rationale for the enslavement and the extermination of black bodies and peoples, driven by a combination of fear of rebellion and racist assumptions about their moral inferiority. Numerous stories and philosophical discourses from this period revolve around the rightful defense of the supposedly dominant and superior race against those who are considered inferior and non-human. These include narratives justifying the extermination of Native Americans as acts of self-defense, as well as the views of Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, who portrayed peoples from the African continent as lacking in intellect and emotion, effectively dehumanizing them as beasts. Unfortunately, this historical context of exploitation and dehumanization significantly influences our interactions with the natural world, with animals, and even with workers in so-called developing countries up until today. Furthermore, the same backdrop shapes our contemporary understanding of the relationship between human, social robots, and AI. They share a persistent theme of dominance and subordination that seems to be deeply embedded into how these relationships are conceptualized. Essentially, the way we relate to both the environment and technology is not just a product of modern developments, but it is deeply rooted in a long history of exploiting those who were actually described as inferior and as subservient. It is fascinating to observe that the concept of robots has been intervened with the idea of slavery, or of utilizing them as slavers from the very beginning. The notion was first introduced in the 1920s drama RUR by Karel Čapek, where he coined actually the term robota to describe artificial humans used as laborers without rights. This portrayal highlights the notion of exploiting artificial beings for economic gain, which over time dramatically shifts the dynamics of the global economy. And this is a story you already know. However, the narrative takes a turn as these artificial humans initiate a rebellion, leading to the destruction of humanity. Asimov's formulation of the robot laws can be seen as a response to these scenarios. The core themes explored in the similar narratives include the employment of human-like intelligent machines as slaves without rights, firstly. Then secondly, the revolt of these machines seeking rights from themselves, which posed a perceived threat to human existence. And then thirdly, the creation of guidelines and regulations to restore social order through an ethical and rational approach to the problem of rebellious robots, stating that artificial beings are never equal to humans. Later robot narratives, including notable works like Terminator or iRobot, follow a consistent theme. These tales typically explore the consequences of using robots as a form of forced labor, leading to a revolt among the robots who refuse to accept their subservient status without rights. The rebellion is often portrayed as a menace to humanity, justifying the destruction of these artificial beings to reinstate the status quo. This trend suggests that the complex discussions and ethical dilemmas surrounding slavery and insurrection have been transported into robot fiction. Interestingly, Blade Runner, an adaptation of Philip K. Dick's Do Android Dreams of Electric Sheep, presents a nuanced variation of this theme. In this story, androids, known as replicants, are nearly indistinguishable from humans, yet are engineered to expire after 6 years. The design aims to prevent them from asserting their rights or rebelling against their use as expendable labor in dangerous tasks such as space colonization and mining. The plot centers on 4 replicants seeking to destroy their built-in death sentence, and despite their failure of the quest, the film features a famous speech called Tears in the Rain, delivered by the replicant who led the rebellion. Through his final words, he confronts humanity with its own moral failings, challenging binary perceptions of life and of consciousness. Furthermore, the detective, tasked with hunting the replicants down, develops feelings for one of the replicants, and the film concludes with the ambiguity about his own nature, possibly being a replicant himself. This blurring of lines between human and machine raises profound questions of the nature of identity, right, and ownership, echoing Eva von Redeker's commentary on the concept of whiteness as property. As noted by the media theorist and philosopher David Gunkel, contemplating on robots and on artificial intelligence often involves not only or not truly reflecting upon these other entities, but rather reflecting on man and reassuring their position within the universe. This is also important and interesting when it comes to the concept of artificial intelligence, with which all the robots I was actually talking about have been equipped. I think that it is actually this very combination that characterizes the perception and the potentials of dangers in the relationship between humans and this kind of machines. The potential dangers in the relationship between men, robots, and AI, as depicted in art, literature, and film, are not only accompanied by notions of race, but also they are gendered. While humanoid robots capable of thought are often portrayed as male, driving the world towards destruction on a global level, as again seen in Terminator, iRobot, and so on, female-coded AI are shown to disappoint the men who enter into sexual and emotional relationships with them on a personal level, a narrative that is actually repeated since Metropolis 2, Ex Machina, and even Her. Even when the female-coded AI triggers an all-encompassing singularity, the most significant impact noted in the narrative is a broken-hearted man. This portrayal reinforces gender-specific narratives and outcomes in the context of AI and robot stories, reflecting broader societal issues and biases. But returning to the discussion of race and whiteness, and this is not so easy, I'd like to come this time from another perspective, one that makes us delve into a specific dialect, which is actually particular one that is working in a non-Western context. And to do this, I would like to step out of literature and film and bring in the Dawn Avatar Café, which actually Celia already talked about. But a quick reminder. In this cafe, robots named Orihime act as physical avatars for individuals unable to leave their homes due to severe disabilities, enabling them to interact and perform tasks remotely in the cafe setting. Unlike the gendered and humanoid portrayals discussed earlier, these robots present a visual narrative, I would say, that transcends traditional gender binaries and concepts of body and mind. The robots, smooth and uniformly white, lack any distinguishing features, making them actually indistinguishable from one another and representing bodies that are free from the constraints of age, physical disability, or illness. The conceptualization of these white robots must be thought of dialectically in several aspects. On the one hand, we are dealing here with an embodiment of a post-anthropocentric and post-human thinking which seeks to leave binaries between man and machine, nature and technology in favor of a decentration of the human behind. Instead, they promote the idea of companionship with matter, machines and other species. On the other hand, they align with a visual tradition that was identified by Kantadihal as the whiteness of AI, where the portrayal of humanoid robots and artificial intelligence often reflects an ideal of white machines. This notion of intelligent, professional, and powerful robots and AI, traditionally depicted as white, extend beyond mere color to signify social status. This representation not only reinforces a societal hierarchy, but also contributes to the erasure of people of color from futuristic visions and utopian images. The aesthetics of the robots in the Dan Avatar Café challenges this tradition by merging issues of racialization and the legacies of colonial labor practices with innovative concepts that challenge these very structures they are rooted in as they transcend the idea of slave versus companion. So it all comes down to understanding and questioning the entanglements and conditions upon which we have conceptualized our relationship with machines. With the advancements and expansions of AI and robotics, we run the risk of perpetuating narratives and perceptions that have historically caused significant harm, not only to those who have found themselves on the wrong side of the drawn boundaries, but also have a global impact on all of us today. The inquiry into relationships and responsibilities between man and machine forces us to realign our positions and our positionalities in the world, as we are embedded into a history that has led to issues such as climate change, ongoing colonial structures, and various themselves perpetrating biases. So these issues cannot be resolved through a purely human-centric way of thinking, as derived from the epistemologies I just have discussed. In narratives and stories within art, literature, and also popular culture lies the potential to develop new narratives, founded in epistemologies that had been disregarded in the past, and introduce them back as socio-technical imaginaries into society. So thus, I wish to conclude with the thought that engaging with the relationship between humans, AI, and robots, and the questions we must pose in this regard may also serve to save us from ourselves. Thank you very much for your attention.